They called them trash. They called them dangerous. And in some countries, they weren't even allowed on store shelves. Yet somehow, the very act of banning them made people want them even more. These were the forbidden VHS tapes you had to whisper about at school or hunt for in dusty video shops. But here's the real kicker. Many of these so-called nasties are now cult treasures. So, which banned horrors turned into legends you can't escape? Let's rewind. Cannibal Holocaust 1980. This wasn't just a movie. It was a cultural explosion that terrified governments and critics alike. Ruggero Deodato's Cannibal Holocaust is often described as the single most infamous of all the banned films. Shot in a documentary-style format, it looked so real that authorities actually believed people had been harmed during its production. Deodato had to haul his actors into court just to prove they were alive. That's how convincing the film's gritty realism appeared at the time. Set in the South American jungle, it followed a team of filmmakers whose shocking footage is discovered after they vanish. What made the movie so unsettling wasn't only the violence on screen, but also the way it blurred the line between fact and fiction. Critics dubbed it obscene, and the UK authorities wasted no time putting it on the Nasties list. Across the globe, countries banned or heavily cut it, and for decades the movie's name alone carried a kind of forbidden aura. Yet all that controversy only fueled curiosity. Bootleg tapes circulated among die-hard fans, horror magazines whispered about its forbidden footage, and by the late 1990s it had developed a massive underground following. Today, Cannibal Holocaust is dissected in film schools, celebrated at horror festivals, and recognized as a grim but groundbreaking piece of genre cinema. Love it or hate it, this one proved that sometimes the ban itself is what turns a movie into a legend. The Driller Killer, 1979. Sometimes it's not the movie itself, but the packaging that lights the fuse. Abel Ferrara's The Driller Killer earned notoriety not just because of what was on screen, but because of the VHS cover plastered across British rental shops. That cover, showing a screaming face about to meet a brutal fate, horrified parents and fueled the moral panic that gave birth to the video nasty era. Authorities seized copies simply based on the artwork, before most even saw the movie. But here's the twist. The actual film is more of a psychological breakdown than a straightforward slasher. It follows an artist in New York who can't handle the pressure of poverty, noise, and creative failure. Instead of going for cheap thrills, Ferrara crafted something closer to an urban nightmare. With gritty camera work and the raw chaos of late 70s New York, the movie feels like a snapshot of a city on edge. Still, when paired with that infamous cover, The Driller Killer became one of the defining titles of the Nasties. Panic. Kids weren't supposed to see it, and that's exactly why they wanted to. By the late 1990s, when the uncut version was finally released, the legend had already grown. Horror fans treated it like a rite of passage, a relic of a wilder time in cinema history. Today, The Driller Killer is remembered less for its content and more as the film that proved how dangerous a VHS cover could be. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. Few titles caused as much outrage as Miyazaki I Spit on Your Grave. When it hit VHS shelves, critics blasted it as immoral and degrading. Authorities in the UK wasted no time dragging it into the Nasties panic, where it was prosecuted and removed from stores. For years, it was held up as the ultimate example of how videotapes were corrupting the youth. But while censors and critics raged, an odd thing happened. Fans discovered something different in it. Instead of treating it as trash, some argued it was a raw story of survival and revenge, filmed with almost documentary-like simplicity. Its stripped-down style and unflinching approach set it apart from the more cartoonish slashers of the era. That sparked heated debates, with one side calling it exploitative, while others claimed it was an extreme, angry reflection of real-world injustice. The ban, ironically, gave it more power. Bootleg copies circulated, whispered about at conventions and horror gatherings, and by the 1990s, the film's reputation had grown beyond measure. Once the uncut edition finally appeared, younger audiences who had only heard the rumors finally got to see what the fuss was about. Today, I Spit on Your Grave isn't just another nasty, it's a controversial landmark, studied in classrooms, discussed at festivals, and endlessly debated by horror fans. It stands as proof that banning something often guarantees it will never be forgotten. The Evil Dead, 1981. Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead didn't just face censorship, it ended up in actual court cases. Authorities considered it obscene, dragging it into the Nasties list. At the time, nobody could have predicted that this scrappy little horror film, made on a shoestring budget by a group of friends in the woods, would eventually become one of the most beloved cult franchises in cinema history. What set The Evil Dead apart was its energy. Raimi's camera practically flew through the forest, creating a sense of chaos and speed that was unlike anything audiences had seen before. The movie piled on outrageous effects, gallons of fake blood, and a manic tone that kept viewers both laughing and squirming. Bruce Campbell, playing the now legendary Ash, delivered a performance that turned him into a cult hero. While British courts tried to bury it, horror fans worked just as hard to keep it alive. Bootleg tapes spread through underground markets, and horror magazines ran glowing reviews that celebrated its inventiveness. By the mid-80s, Raimi had followed it up with Evil Dead 2, which leaned even harder into wild humor, cementing its cult status. Today, it's impossible to imagine horror culture without The Evil Dead. It spawned sequels, a TV series, video games, and an endless stream of fan tributes. What once sat in the courtroom as a dangerous nasty now plays in midnight movie marathons, proving that no amount of censorship can stop a film this wildly entertaining. Cannibal Ferox, 1981. If you wanted a film that leaned into its own notoriety, Cannibal Ferox wore its ban like a badge of honor. Marketed with the outrageous tagline, "Banned in 31 countries," Umberto Lenzi's jungle horror was designed to shock, and shock it did. UK authorities quickly pulled it into the Nasties panic, where it was banned and heavily cut for decades. The film followed a group of travelers who wander into dangerous territory and find themselves at the mercy of locals. It's filled with graphic imagery, but what made it stand out was how shamelessly it tried to outdo every competitor. Lenzi clearly wanted to top Cannibal Holocaust, and in some ways he succeeded by crafting a movie that was less realistic, but even more outrageous. What could have doomed it to obscurity instead made it unforgettable. Fans traded battered bootleg copies, arguing about which scenes had been cut and which remained intact. The legend only grew as magazines ran features with headlines like "The Most Shocking Movie Ever Made." By the 2000s, Cannibal Ferox was fully restored on DVD and Blu-ray, where a new generation of horror buffs embraced it as a cult classic. Today, it's less remembered for its content and more for its place in history as the movie that turned censorship into a marketing tool. When a film proudly declares itself banned, you know it's aiming straight for cult immortality. Tenebrae, 1982. Dario Argento's Tenebrae wasn't just another horror film on the Nasties list, it was a razor-sharp puzzle box wrapped in neon light. Authorities in the UK didn't see style, though. They saw blood, sharp objects, and a sense of dread that made it an easy target for seizure. So, Tenebrae joined the infamous catalog of forbidden tapes. But here's what separated Tenebrae from the pack. Argento didn't treat it as mere shock entertainment. He built it like a fever dream of paranoia. With a killer stalking characters in sunlit Rome, the camera swooped over walls, lingered on clues, and delivered some of the most meticulously staged set pieces of the early 80s. Instead of darkness, Argento bathed his nightmare in bright clinical light, making every strike feel more unnerving. While censors tried to bury it, fans kept the film alive through whispers, fanzines, and bootleg screenings. Collectors praised its craftsmanship, pointing out that Argento had elevated horror into something closer to surreal art. By the time it finally resurfaced in the UK, it wasn't just welcomed back, it was celebrated as one of the director's defining works. Today, Tenebrae isn't remembered as a nasty, but as one of the cornerstones of Italian horror. Its legacy is felt in countless thrillers, music videos, and even modern prestige TV that borrows Argento's flair for the operatic. What was once too dangerous for video shops is now viewed as a masterclass in stylish suspense. The Beyond, 1981. Lucio Fulci's The Beyond was treated like contraband in the UK, caught in the dragnet of the Nasties panic and seized for being too grotesque. At first glance, it looked like another over-the-top gore fest. But underneath the red paint and haunting effects, Fulci was crafting a surreal nightmare that would later be hailed as his masterpiece. Set around a Louisiana hotel built over one of the gates of hell, The Beyond is less about plot and more about atmosphere. Walls ooze, eyes bleed, and the boundaries of reality collapse into a dreamlike swirl. At the time, censors saw chaos and blood and shut it down. Yet those very qualities turned it into gold for fans of extreme horror. For years, The Beyond lived underground. Horror buffs passed around battered copies, thrilled by its bizarre imagery and relentless atmosphere. When it was finally re-released in the 1990s, it immediately won over new audiences. Quentin Tarantino himself helped champion it, securing screenings through his Rolling Thunder label in the US. That was the moment Fulci went from cult favorite to horror legend. Now, The Beyond is a staple at midnight screenings and horror marathons. What once sat in legal limbo as an obscene tape is now studied as a prime example of European surrealist horror. The band didn't kill it, it gave it immortality. Zombie Flesheaters, 1979. When a movie contains a scene where a zombie wrestles a shark underwater, you already know it's destined for cult legend. Lucio Fulci's Zombie Flesheaters, released as Zombie 2 in Italy, was supposed to cash in on Romero's Dawn of the Dead. Instead, it became one of the most notorious nasties on the UK list. Authorities seized it for its relentless gore, including eye-piercing close-ups that made even hardened horror fans squirm. Critics sneered at it as tasteless imitation, and yet fans couldn't stop talking about it. Why? Because it pushed the zombie genre into territory no one else dared explore. The film follows a group investigating a strange outbreak on a Caribbean island, and while the story was simple, Fulci delivered set pieces that cemented the movie's legacy. The infamous shark fight scene has been replayed in documentaries, retrospectives, and fan edits for decades. It's pure grindhouse spectacle, equal parts ridiculous and unforgettable. Despite its ban, Zombie Flesheaters built a reputation as the nastiest of the zombie boom. By the time it was reissued uncut, it had already become a rite of passage for horror fans. Today, its influence can be seen in everything from modern zombie games to splatter comedies. What censors thought would vanish ended up becoming one of the most iconic zombie films ever made, Anthropophagus, 1980. If one film truly pushed the Nasties list into notorious territory, it was Joe D'Amato's Anthropophagus, also known as the Grim Reaper. On paper, it sounded like just another stranded tourist horror flick. But in execution, it went so far over the line that it became one of the most infamous tapes ever seized. The film follows a group of travelers who end up on an isolated island, only to be stalked by a deranged cannibal. But what made it infamous were its extreme moments, scenes that censors immediately flagged as unacceptable. Copies were seized under Section 1 of the Obscene Publications Act, and dealers who stocked it risked fines or worse. Instead of disappearing, though, Anthropophagus became a legend. Fans whispered about its most shocking moments, daring each other to find uncut bootlegs. It was the kind of tape you hid under your bed, the one that gave you bragging rights if you managed to see it. When it finally resurfaced decades later, critics were divided. Some called it crude and clumsy, while others embraced it as a cult treasure of Italian splatter cinema. Today, Anthropophagus still carries a reputation as one of the wildest nasties ever made. It's not polished, it's not subtle, but it's unforgettable. Absurd, 1981. What do you do after creating one of the most infamous nasties of all time? If you're Joe D'Amato, you double down and make something even wilder. Absurd, released as a kind of spiritual follow-up to Anthropophagus, didn't waste any time getting itself banned in the UK. Authorities slapped it straight onto the Nasties list, and for years it was locked away from public release. The story centers on a genetically altered man who escapes a lab and terrorizes a small town. Think slasher movie mixed with mad science, all delivered with buckets of gore. D'Amato knew exactly what buttons to push: outrageous set pieces, shocking close-ups, and a sense of bleak inevitability. Censors considered it unfit for release, but horror fans saw something different. Absurd became a prized bootleg, circulating in tape-trading circles across Europe and America. Fans who loved Anthropophagus treated it like the missing chapter in a forbidden saga. By the time it was finally restored in the 2010s, it had already cemented its reputation as a cult staple. Today, Absurd stands as one of those films that proves how banning something only makes it more desirable. It may not have the artistry of Argento or Fulci, but for fans of splatter cinema, it delivers exactly what the title promises. Absurd is pure Nasties-era chaos, and it wears that badge proudly. House on the Edge of the Park, 1980. Ruggero Deodato, the same director behind Cannibal Holocaust, returned with House on the Edge of the Park, a film that instantly became a lightning rod for controversy. The setup seemed deceptively simple. Two men crash a party in a wealthy suburban home. What followed, however, was a tense night of intimidation, humiliation, and violence that shocked even seasoned horror audiences. Authorities in the UK didn't hesitate to seize it. To them, it was more than just offensive, it was dangerous. The film was banned outright, joining the infamous Nasties list. Yet the very extremity that got it pulled off shelves gave it new life underground. Horror collectors sought it out precisely because it was forbidden, trading tapes and whispering about its most disturbing scenes. As years passed, fans began to re-examine it, not just as shock cinema but as a critique of class and power dynamics. Was Deodato simply exploiting brutality, or was he holding up a mirror to the darker side of human nature? The debate continues to this day, fueling its cult status. When it finally resurfaced, it was heavily cut, but the legend had already grown beyond the censor's reach. Today, House on the Edge of the Park stands as one of the grimmest and most controversial nasties, a movie that forces viewers to confront just how fragile the line between safety and terror can be. Nightmares in a damaged brain. 1981. If there's one nasty that earned its reputation through marketing alone, it's Romano Scavolini's Nightmares in a Damaged Brain. Promoted with lurid posters promising extreme imagery, it caught the attention of authorities before it even hit the shelves. Seized under the Nasties panic, it became one of the most infamous prosecutions of the era. The film itself follows a man released from psychiatric care who struggles with violent urges and twisted hallucinations. On screen, it blended slasher tropes with psychological horror, often blurring the line between reality and delusion. What really set it apart, however, was its promotional campaign. The distributors hyped it as the most shocking film you'll ever see, which all but guaranteed that the censors would come knocking. As with many nasties, the ban only added to its reputation. Fans traded bootlegs, curious to see what could possibly be so extreme that authorities had to step in. Horror magazines ran features on it, further fueling the mystique. By the time Nightmares in a Damaged Brain finally resurfaced, its legend had eclipsed the actual content. Critics today see it as uneven but fascinating, a time capsule of how the Nasties panic could turn a mid-tier slasher into a cult icon. Sometimes, the marketing is just as powerful as the movie itself. Evil Speak 1981. Clint Howard, starring in a horror film about a bullied cadet using his computer to summon dark forces, sounds wild enough today. But back in the early 80s, it was a lightning rod. Evil Speak took school settings, technology, and supernatural terror and mashed them into one bizarre cult classic. In the UK, though, censors weren't amused. They seized it under the Nasties panic and kept it off shelves for years. What made Evil Speak unique was its strange blend of old and new. Instead of ancient rituals in caves or castles, this movie had its protagonist typing commands into a primitive computer, complete with glowing green text to channel evil. Add in gruesome scenes like a sword-based beheading and a memorable attack involving wild boars, and you can see why authorities clamped down fast. But just like with so many other nasties, the ban only helped build its legend. Fans traded tapes, amazed at the mix of retro computer tech and over-the-top horror. By the time it returned uncut in the 2000s, Evil Speak had already found its audience. People who loved it not only for its gore, but for its bizarre creativity and 80 seconds charm. Today, Evil Speak is remembered less as an obscene film and more as a cult treasure. It's the perfect example of how the Nasties era elevated even the strangest concepts into underground legends. Who knew a DOS prompt could be this terrifying? Bay of Blood 1971. Before Friday the 13th, before the endless wave of 80s slashers, there was Mario Bava's Bay of Blood. Released in 1971, it laid the groundwork for everything the genre would become. Multiple killers, inheritance schemes, and a body count that piled up in creative fashion. But when the Nasties panic hit, authorities weren't impressed with its historical importance. They saw the blood, the inventive kills, and quickly branded it obscene. Banned in the UK, Bay of Blood became one of the most sought-after tapes among collectors. Horror fans recognized it as more than a cheap thrill. It was the missing link between the Italian giallo movement and the American slasher boom. Critics later pointed out that several kills in Friday the 13th Part 2 were directly lifted from Bava's masterpiece. The irony is that while censors tried to bury it, Bay of Blood's DNA lived on in every major slasher franchise. By the time it was finally restored and released uncut, it had already earned its place as a cult cornerstone. Today, it's celebrated not just as a nasty, but as a piece of horror history that influenced an entire generation of filmmakers. Blood Feast, 1963. Herschel Gordon Lewis's Blood Feast predates most of the Nasties by nearly 2 decades, but when the panic arrived, it was swept up all the same. Branded obscene in the UK, it was removed from shelves and banned for years. On the surface, it was crude, A low-budget story about a caterer who butchers victims as part of a bizarre ritual. But in reality, it was revolutionary. Blood Feast is widely considered the first true splatter film, pioneering the idea that gore itself could be the main attraction. Critics loathed it, but audiences couldn't get enough. When it hit the Nasties list in the 80s, it was already legendary among Grindhouse fans. The ban only reignited interest, making it a crown jewel of underground tape trading circles. By the time it returned uncut decades later, its reputation had grown into myth. Younger fans embraced it as a campy, over-the-top relic of a different era, while historians recognized it as a crucial milestone in horror cinema. Without Blood Feast, there would be no gore-soaked slashers, no splatter comedies, and no Nasties boom at all. Today, it's celebrated at festivals and screenings as the godfather of gore. From banned obscenity to cult canon, Blood Feast proved that even the crudest beginnings can lead to immortal legacies. So there you have it. 15 movies once dragged through courtrooms, seized from shelves, and condemned as dangerous, only to rise again as cult treasures. These weren't just Nasties, they were the spark that fueled decades of horror fandom. Love them, hate them, or laugh at them. Their legacy proves one thing. Nothing makes a movie immortal quite like being told you're not supposed to watch it. Which Nasty do you think deserves its cult crown? Drop your answer below.